Last night's episode of The Late Show with Stephen Colbert was unlike anything we've seen before. What was expected to be a routine political back and forth between the late-night host and Republican political commentator Karoline Leavitt spiraled into a fiery confrontation, live and unfiltered, that has since exploded across social media. From the moment Karoline took her seat on the iconic navy blue couch, something felt off. The usual banter was missing. Stephen, typically sharp and witty but measured with his conservative guests, opened the interview with a raised eyebrow and an unusually cold tone. After a few softball questions on the 2024 elections and her recent campaign efforts, Colbert suddenly shifted the conversation. "Let's talk about some of the statements you've made regarding gender identity," he said, voice carefully neutral but eyes narrowed. "You've criticized policies supporting gender-affirming care for trans youth. Some say that's not just politically controversial, it's deeply harmful. And I have to ask, is that rooted in your fear of change, or just plain old bigotry?" The audience gasped, a collective intake of breath, followed by stunned silence. Karoline blinked, visibly caught off guard, then tried to collect herself. "Stephen," she started, "that's a gross misrepresentation." But he cut her off. "No, let me finish. You've spoken at rallies where attendees have held signs saying 'Protect our kids,' but those same rallies were filled with anti-trans rhetoric. And last week, didn't you appear on a podcast where the host called trans kids a delusion, and you didn't push back once? I can't be responsible for everything someone else says." "But you sat there and smiled," Colbert interjected. "So, what are we supposed to think? You're either complicit or you agree." Karoline leaned forward, her tone sharpening. "You're cherry-picking moments and stitching them into a narrative that fits your agenda. I've never disrespected anyone's humanity. My concern is with children making life-altering decisions they may not understand yet. That's not hatred. That's called being responsible." Colbert shook his head, clearly unconvinced. "You say it's about responsibility, but to me, and to many watching, it looks a lot like fear and ignorance dressed up as concern." The room was hot. Even viewers at home could feel it, and it only escalated from there. "Ignorance?" Karoline repeated, eyes narrowing. "You sit behind that desk and mock anyone who doesn't fit into your worldview, Stephen. You've got a laugh track to cover for when you cross the line. But when someone like me tries to raise legitimate concerns about real-world consequences, suddenly I'm the villain?" Stephen leaned back, arms crossed. "Legitimate concerns? You're advocating policies that erase people's identities." Karoline sat silent for a moment, swallowing hard. "I'm advocating for policies that prevent irreversible decisions being made on minors who are too young to vote, too young to drink, but somehow old enough to decide their gender for life." Colbert wasn't backing down. "That sounds a lot like saying trans kids don't exist." "No, it sounds like saying maybe we should pause before pushing ideology onto developing minds." The crowd gave a mixture of nervous laughter and murmured, "Dissent." Colbert took that moment to press harder. "And what about the racial undertones in your statements last year about school curriculum? You said we shouldn't be teaching victimhood culture, which critics say is coded language, to erase Black history." Karoline froze. This was the turn she hadn't expected. "That's not what I said, and you know it," she said quietly, her voice tight. "Oh, really?" Stephen replied. "Because I've got the transcript right here. You said, and I quote, 'Teaching kids to see themselves as victims because of history is doing more harm than good.'" "I stand by that," Karoline said, her voice rising. "We should teach history, all of it, but not through a lens that divides kids by race and convinces some that they're inherently oppressed and others that they're inherently guilty. That's not unity. That's indoctrination." A few audience members clapped hesitantly. Most were stunned silent. Stephen raised an eyebrow, waiting. "So when you say you care about children, you only care when it fits your cultural values?" Karoline snapped. I care about all children. Enough to say what's hard to hear. Enough to be hated for it. Colbert looked at her coldly. Or maybe you just care about the version of America where your definition of normal stays unchallenged. The words hung in the air like smoke. Caroline's eyes burned, but she didn't speak. Not yet. Not until the next moment. A moment that would turn the entire conversation on its head. Stephen leaned in for one last jab. Tell me, Karoline, when was the last time you sat with a trans teen and asked what they need, instead of just assuming you know? Karoline blinked fast. Her voice trembled slightly when she finally answered. I have. You don't know everything about me. Stephen tried to move on, but she interrupted this time, her voice louder. No. You don't get to drop bombs and walk away from the blast. You think you're the moral compass of late night? You think mocking and cornering your guests is some kind of progress? Colbert sat back, lips pressed in a line. Maybe the real problem, Karoline said, isn't that I'm scared of change. Maybe the real problem is that you're so wrapped up in your performance that you can't even see how condescending you've become. She turned slightly toward the audience now, voice steadier. You all laugh because you think this is safe. You think this is comedy. But the real world is hurting. And with that, the energy in the room shifted. The tension didn't break. It crystallized. The audience sat frozen in place, unsure of whether to cheer, clap, or hold their breath. Stephen Colbert, for once, didn't have a witty retort locked and loaded. He looked across the desk at Karoline Leavitt, who had, in one sentence, stripped away the comedic armor the show usually hides behind. She adjusted her microphone and leaned in slightly. Her voice, now trembling but deliberate, cut through the silence. You don't have to agree with me, Stephen. Frankly, I don't expect you to. But to come on this show and be ambushed with accusations of being racist and transphobic? That's not journalism. That's character assassination wrapped in applause lines. There was no smirk from Colbert this time, just a hard stare. Karoline continued. Do you want to talk about the hard stuff? Then fine. Let's talk. But let's not pretend this is a conversation when it's really a courtroom and I'm the defendant in a trial you've already decided the verdict of. The crowd didn't quite know how to react. It was no longer entertainment. It was uncomfortable truth. Stephen finally spoke. Karoline, if you're going to speak about children and gender and race in ways that deeply affect millions, you should expect pushback. I do, she snapped. I expect disagreement. I expect argument. What I don't expect is to be accused of hating people simply for having a different point of view. You think disagreement is violence now? That words, carefully spoken and driven by concern, are the same as hate speech? Colbert raised his hand, motioning to speak, but she kept going. The studio, silent as ever, seemed to give her the floor. You want to paint me as a villain because I don't believe a 10-year-old should be put on puberty blockers. That's not hate. That's caution. That's protecting a child's chance to be a child. Their brains aren't done developing. You wouldn't let them drive. You wouldn't let them get a tattoo. But we're supposed to believe they're ready to redefine their entire identity permanently, without question. That's not compassion. That's reckless. Her voice cracked on the last word, and she paused, fighting something deeper. The audience leaned in. Do you think I want to be the one saying this? Do you think I haven't sat across from devastated parents? Do you think I haven't spoken to young adults who regret the decisions they made as kids because adults were too afraid to tell them to wait? It's not a political game to me. I've cried with them. I've held them. She wiped her eyes. Quickly. The tears came anyway. Colbert softened his posture but didn't speak. For the first time in the segment, there was no interruption. Karoline continued, this time quieter. We've created a culture where asking questions is forbidden, where concern equals cruelty, where trying to safeguard children is called hate. And it's not just wrong, it's dangerous. What happens when the pendulum swings and no one is allowed to speak the truth without fear of being destroyed? The audience was now silent. No laughter, no clapping, just stillness. "I believe in freedom," she said. "Freedom to be who you are, but also freedom to ask, are we moving too fast? Are we letting children carry burdens their shoulders were never meant to bear? Are we so afraid of offending people that we'll let a generation be the experiment?" She paused again, visibly shaking now. "You're the one with the platform, Stephen. Millions listen to you. But instead of asking questions, you'd rather mock people like me. Easier, isn't it? Makes you feel brave. But it's not bravery. It's applause-chasing cowardice," Stephen exhaled slowly. "You're clearly passionate about this, but passion doesn't excuse the consequences of your rhetoric." Karoline stood. "And silence doesn't excuse yours." She removed her mic, slowly and deliberately, and set it on the desk. Her eyes were red but clear. "You wanted a headline. Tonight, Stephen? You got it. But maybe, just maybe, instead of trying to win the argument, you should have tried listening." And with that, Karoline Leavitt turned and walked off the stage. The camera tried to follow her, but the producers quickly cut to Stephen, who sat still in his chair, blinking. The band didn't play. The lights didn't flicker cheerfully. There was no funny quip to ease the tension. It was rare to see Colbert stunned into silence, but that night he was. For a full 20 seconds, he didn't speak. Then he looked to the camera, and for once, the grin was gone. "Well," he said quietly, "that was a conversation." He fidgeted with his cue cards, clearly unsure how to pivot. "We'll be right back," he finally said, and the show cut to commercial with an awkward fade and no music. Within minutes, the clip hit social media like a lightning bolt. The raw footage, unedited, uncensored, spread across Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok like wildfire. Hashtags exploded. Karoline Colbert, Leavitt walks out, late show meltdown, and the deeply divisive "let kids be kids" opinion was split. Predictably, but not neatly. Even some who disagreed with Karoline's views admitted she held her ground with a kind of sincerity rarely seen in political television. Others praised Colbert for pressing hard and not giving a platform to what they considered harmful rhetoric. But what no one could deny was that it wasn't just another late-night episode. It was the episode. By sunrise, major media outlets were dissecting the fallout. Morning show anchors tiptoed around their reactions. Editorials poured in, some defending Colbert, others heralding Karoline as a voice unafraid to go against the grain. But the lasting image from the night? A woman standing alone on a brightly lit stage, tears in her eyes, voice steady, challenging the narrative, refusing to be cornered, and walking away not because she lost, but because she had said what she came to say. And whether you agreed with her or not, one thing was certain. No one watching that night would forget what happened.